following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Bronx Roots, Michael Preminger, David Hubler, and myself, Ralph Tyko. I'm from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we get together every Sunday morning, the three of us, and just talk life, talk the Bronx, talk our roots, and we love doing it. So I'd just like to say that I'm really grateful for having you guys in my life, Michael Preminger and David Hubler. Start with you, David. How the hell are you?
I'm doing well. We had a minor flurry of snow yesterday. It's all gone today. We're going to be up in the 60s. The weather here is far more important to us than your weather is to you out there. But in any case, because you're in better climate. But it's nice to see that it comes to an end. I don't like winter, but I'm really happy when I see it coming to an end. So I guess I can.
I would love to be a weatherman in Northern California or in Southern California. Every day, same as yesterday. How are you?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'll take my
Even
chair.
though they said, or maybe I mentioned this last week, that February was the coldest February since like 1930 or 37 years or something. Is now compared to back east, it was put on your shorts and go jogging, but it was chilly last month, and it's been so things are a little different anyway.
They're getting better. It's warmer.
Well, yeah. I mean, I still can't understand people who prefer winter over summer. I mean, not only is it a ridiculous comparison, but like today's the first day of daylight savings time, and that means a great deal because it stays nice longer. You get up in the morning, it's dark, but so what?
Right.
It's going to get light rather than the other way around.
Right.
So I'm really happy. I don't understand these places that refuse to go into daylight savings time. There are a few pockets in the country. I mean.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
so
like Arizona.
What are their reasoning?
I don't know.
Something
They've got
to
sun
do
all
with
year
the
round.
farms, with
I don't know. I think in Arizona it might have something to do with keeping the dry, arid desert a dry, arid desert. I don't know. But there are other places, too, in the States that do silly things like that. Like, for example, Tennessee. Tennessee is split in half into two time zones. So if you're in East Tennessee, it's Eastern time, and if you're in West Tennessee, it's Central time.
Didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. That's absurd.
I know. I mean, so if you drive from one part of the state to the other, you either lose or gain an hour, depending on which way you're going.
Or bank branches having to stay open at a certain time, or this, that, and the other thing, or...
I would guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Boy, that is weird.
Yeah, it is weird. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you guys want to talk about today? Do we have anything in the news of any interest whatsoever?
Yes, a little bit of news.
You think?
Babe Ruth's daughter died.
Yes.
Talk about his connection to the Bronx.
102 years young. 102 years young.
Yeah. She was a terrific left-hand hitter, you know.
I didn't know that.
Yes, her father taught her. She was a...
And loved hot dogs.
And loved hot dogs, exactly, yes.
And not many people know that, and it does, as if it matters, as Seinfeld would say. She loved women, too, like Babe. No, she did. I don't know if she loved women.
Well, they called her Baby Babe, was her nickname, Baby Babe.
Really?
Well, till she was about 75 or 80, but then they stopped.
Oh. Did they stop?
Yeah, she stopped being a baby.
Baby Babe.
What a character, Babe Ruth. Did he set the tone for baseball or what in terms? Now, you wrote a book, David, on baseball, the
right.
Nats and the Grays. Did you research a more powerful character or know of a more powerful character in baseball than Babe Ruth?
Oh, no, not especially not in the wartime era, because so many of the real stars had gone off to the service. But no, I mean, he was a singular character in the history of the game. I mean, you know, there are arguments that there were better ball players, and certainly some players that they thought were more conducive to making the game the wholesome pastime that it was. But no one had the influence. Did I tell you? I saw that film with Babe Ruth in it. I think I mentioned it maybe on the other show, but it was a silent movie with Harold Lloyd, and made about 1921 or so. Yeah, well, it had to be 21 or 22, because Harold Lloyd it's a silent movie. He plays a part of a cab driver who drives his cab for his prospective father-in-law. Anyway, and he's sort of a wacko kind of driver. But in one scene, he picks up Babe Ruth in the cab, and Ruth says, you know, take me to Yankee Stadium. So, I mean, it's got to be 22, I would think, because I think the stadium opened in 21, or maybe 23. But it was very soon after the stadium opened. And he's sitting in the back seat, and you just see him going swaying from side to side as Harold tries to maneuver what then was considered traffic up to the Bronx.
And did you mention that Lou Gehrig played a little cameo role in that?
Yeah, no, he was, but the announcer afterwards mentioned it. I didn't. He just sort of stuck his face in the window of the cab and stuck his tongue out.
That's right.
And I didn't see that. I just missed that. I guess I was so intrigued watching. You know, this is like 1922, okay? So he didn't hit 60 home runs till 1927. But 22, he came over to the Yankees 1919, I think, somewhere around there. I mean, the man was such an iconic figure at such an early age that he was in the movies already, you know, and considered a real draw to bring in, you know, fans to watch Harold Lloyd on film. He was iconic in so many ways. He later made several films.
He did make some. There's a piece of film that's shown that he's wearing a crown on his head. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah, I have.
I don't know if
I've seen that picture. Didn't know where it came from.
Silent movie. He probably made a few silent movies.
Well, I know that one was a silent. Yeah, that one was a silent.
Yeah, in addition to the one you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Because he was in such demand so soon, you know. It wasn't like after his career ended, people began to idolize him. They idolized him from day one. As soon as he left Boston, even though he was a terrific pitcher for the Red Sox, it didn't have let's face it, Boston is not New York in terms of publicity, attractions, that sort of thing.
Right. The Big Apple.
Yeah, the Big Apple, and in the 20s, of course, you know, New York was the epicenter of sports. You had Madison Square Garden and Jack Dempsey and athletes like that, and Babe Ruth just fit in really naturally with that. Yeah.
When did he hit like a lot of home runs? Was that like by 1921 or so?
He started hitting them then, yeah, but he sort of built up. I think at one point he hit 59 or 58, and then he broke his own record in 27 with the 60 home runs, and that was the most he ever hit in a season. But and he was a terrific athlete. If you see him as a young man, especially there's some film of him, pitching for Boston or just warming up on the sidelines, and he was trim and he was very fast, and he was an all-around athlete till he sort of let himself go a bit and put on a bit of a paunch, but he still could hit. Yeah. I mean,
hey, guys, I woke up a little angry this morning, and I'll tell you why. I'm watching a CNN analyst talking about the fact that the Democrats are playing right into Trump's hand, and Trump is coming out criticizing the Democrats for becoming an anti-Semitic party, right, and splitting them up in such a way that I'm afraid I had this real gut scare that if this guy stays in office to run, he's going to get elected again.
That's a great segue, Ralph. I have to compliment you.
No, it wasn't a segue. I just couldn't think of it. I'm sitting here fuming about this all morning.
Well, and, don't let it bother you. It's just typical,
Yeah, that's typical of me, huh?
No, not of you. I'm saying it's just what I meant, it's typical nonsense that goes on. These people need something to talk about.
But it's typical nonsense. But could this country? I'm going to ask you both. Could this country stand another 6 years of this bullshit?
I would think not, and at the same time, I have the same terrible dream, so to speak. It's not a dream, nightmare that you have, Ralph, that this guy could get elected and almost rather easily reelected.
Well, I'm more dubious. I'm far more dubious than.
Boy, I hope I'm wrong. But
I hope I'm right. And we're hoping the same thing, for the same end.
Exactly.
But I just look
see
at
the party as so ineffective. The party that gave us Debbie Wasserman Schultz and
good looking
negated Bernie's being, basically, and cost the election. And I see something like that happening again.
Bernie, that didn't cost the election. What cost the election was Hillary's terrible campaign. I mean, her refusal to go into the 3 key states that she thought she had locked up, and those are the 3 states she lost that gave Trump the election. It wasn't Bernie Sanders, because by that time
she wouldn't have been there, David, if they hadn't stole the primaries. It wouldn't have been hers to lose. It would have been his to win. And I cannot see him losing to that buffoon. He would have stood up to everything.
There were a lot of people that, and look, 9 out of every 10 people would have bet their a week's wages on Hillary Clinton beating Trump.
Sure.
Right?
That's true. Yes. You would think that she couldn't screw it up enough to lose.
Well, look, there are a lot of things that are happening now, beginning to happen or are happening, that are going to put Trump in a bit of a hole, I believe. One of them being the fact that there are 3 million voters out there who voted for Clinton over Trump, despite his prevaricating about the numbers. That's one thing. several of the other things. Look what happened now. Just this past week, I guess it was, in Ohio. They closed a Ford plant. 4,500 people are being put out of work overnight.
Right.
Okay.
And he had given them some tax breaks to stay.
Well, no, that was a different company, but he certainly made it clear that he was going to, work for the worker, that he was going to make sure that everybody was working. There's no movement to increase coal production in the country. A lot of economists are now seeing the beginnings of what they say could be a real downturn next year, because we sort of slow down in unemployment numbers and hiring numbers, especially this past week. And don't forget, on top of all of this is the big, the 500-pound gorilla in the corner. That's the Mueller investigation.
Right.
If it ever sees the light of day.
Exactly.
Oh, it will. It will. They'll have to release parts of it, especially now with the Democrats holding the House. They've got all the cards in their favor. They've got subpoena power, which they didn't have the first 2 years of Trump. That's a big thing.
Question.
People don't realize. Yeah.
But he's making some statements, like he says, I dream of a world when a president can be president for life.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. Yeah, why does he?
But he has the chutzpah to word those words, to mouth those words, and a blatant disrespect for the press. And
of course.
Some antitrust stuff with AT&T and Time Warner trying to get together. He hates CNN. He hates the news, and it makes me think of pre-Hitler Germany.
Well, or a little closer in time and location. Castro. If you recall, Fidel Castro was greeted as not only a national hero in Cuba, but many Americans thought throwing Batista out was a great idea. And here was a guy, former baseball player. He milked his connections to the U.S. to the hilt. And then he turned around and boom, and he became president for life. So if Trump is thinking along those lines, maybe he ought to move to Cuba.
Well, maybe we ought to look at the place to deport him to Cuba. That would
the Cubans wouldn't take him.
No.
That would be a big insult. But,
I wonder if after he gets out of prison, he'll be able to rehabilitate his image in some way.
Yeah.
A talk show or something.
Who are we talking about? Trump?
Trump, yeah.
You're assuming he'll go to prison, but he can't go to prison.
I am hoping that he will, to make things right with the world.
I'd even settle for him just getting out of the White House and moving back to Trump Tower and leaving the rest of us alone.
Yeah, that would be nice.
That would be nice, but I just don't know.
Well, I did hear something that really shook me up. You know how he's been going after Latinos and Mexicans especially.
Mm-hmm.
This came up about a week or so ago, and I was really surprised and somewhat angered, but typical of Trump. The Homeland Security people are now beginning to weed out the Vietnamese refugees who came here at our at our invitation after the Vietnam War ended, and weed out those. Now, keep in mind, that's 30 years ago or so. The ones who have had minor run-ins with the law, excessive drinking or traffic tickets or whatever, and sending them back to Vietnam.
Really?
Now, yes.
Whoa.
So
and
he's taking.
Supposedly have a good relationship with Vietnam and a prospering relationship with Vietnam.
Well, I think that was part of, maybe the idea came to his mind when he was over there in Hanoi to talk with Kim. But I mean, he's taking one minority group after another and picking them off, like to try to get rid of them.
He wants an all white country.
Yeah,
obviously. And that's
well,
frightening.
I guess what made me mad was that self-righteous speech about the Democrats being the anti-Semitic party, and that guy who says at a rally of the neo-Nazis
right.
there are good people
on both sides. Yeah.
I don't know how you can say that.
He says anything that comes into his mind. He is totally uncontrolled. This is why communications directors in the White House don't last very long. He's up to number 4 now. So they're averaging 6 months, if you figure it that way.
I wonder how much power Sarah Huckabee has, or if she contributes to what is said, or if she's just a puppet.
Oh, she's just a puppet. No question about it. That's why she's held on to her job for so long. She has no insight into him. She says what they tell her to say, and then sometimes she says things that she believes being one of the Trump close-knit allies. Because her father was governor of Arkansas, and he was a bit of a nutcase.
Right. As the far right tends to be.
Yeah, well, sure. By our standards. It's too early. It's just too early to get too excised about all of this. It just seems that we have to wait and see what happens.
Okay, David, let me ask you then about your response to the CNN documentary this weekend. It's kind of ongoing at different times on the Bushes. Was there
I haven't seen it.
Enlightening?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Have you, Michael?
No, I haven't.
I have a pen from his office when he was vice president. I do. They give those things out as, like gifts.
I hope they're not charged.
Yeah. I'm holding it in my hand right now. The vice president of the United States is a nice little box with his signature on it, and then you open it up, and there's it probably doesn't write anymore because they put no ink in it anymore, or dried up.
Well,
the vice
since you guys haven't seen it, I want to tell you what I got out of it, was that Prescott Bush wasn't as bad a person, and couldn't possibly be, than I thought he was. I thought his reputation was that of being a friend of Hitler. But he had some social graces to him. I think he was known as not being, and in his day with his bucks, he was an exception, but he was good to the civil rights movement of the time, and he wasn't such a bad person, and that I got a little feeling for the Bushes. They lost a daughter.
Yes.
And that really made me feel, they showed some humanity. They expressed them, the Bushes, in a humanistic way. And I'm sad for anybody who loses a child.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, I knew he'd been senator from Connecticut, Prescott, but I didn't know very much about him, to tell you the truth. But I thought he was one of those, the old-time Republican, like of the what do you call them, the upper class, the elite. He was an old New Englander, like Henry Cabot Lodge and the lodges, and
very privileged.
Yeah, very privileged, exactly. He was, he would be called today. Would be called a moderate Republican if there was such a thing anymore.
Right, and even Bush at one time, the Herbert Bush that we knew, considered himself a moderate Republican. Wasn't so, but he thought of himself as that. And truth be known, in our day and their day, there was very little difference between a Democrat and a Republican.
Well, not in the Roosevelt administration.
That is true.
You asked about.
But my thinking was back in the Keating days, as an example.
Oh, well, yeah, because he was from New York State. He was a liberal Republican, to speak.
Right.
So was, in many ways, so was Rockefeller. But you asked about the book in comparison to Babe Ruth and others. The part of the book we were writing about the advent of the GI Bill of Rights, and what the Republican congressman did was to throw every possible lie about the program to the American people. They were against Social Security. They were against TVA. They were against anything that had any social import that the Democrats wanted to do. And Roosevelt was able to do it because he had a Democratic majority in both houses. But the Republicans were adamant that this was leading to socialism and communism, and that's all they would talk about. And they're very much like today's group.
This was Herbert Hoover and the boys.
Well, yeah, but amongst Senator Taft from Ohio and a number of other ones. So they were the same stripe as they are today. Just, the poor people be damned.
David, let me ask you why people have a problem with the difference between communism and socialism. Why are people so afraid of socialism when the libraries are socialistic, the police are socialistic? There's so many things in our society that, the garbage, for instance, why do people have trouble?
Well, the garbage, what's socialistic about the garbage?
Well, maybe the garbage isn't, but the library certainly is.
Yeah, well, in public schools, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah. Exactly. Why do people have a problem with the word socialism?
Ignorance, and being fed Trump-like statements. That's really what it is, and it goes back, to McCarthy, before McCarthy. And there are a lot of socialist things about government owning some of the means of production. You wouldn't want to get up into an airplane without the FCC on the ground.
Sure.
That's one area that's certainly that's socialism, if you want to call it that. And they're afraid of a medical government operation taking over.
Yes.
But and I didn't think much about it before we moved to England to live. And during those 4 years there, I saw. Now, granted, it's a smaller country with a much less of a population, but no one lost their home, lost their livelihood by having to go into the hospital for an operation. No one had to go into debt to pay for the operation. People were not afraid of going to see a doctor or filling a prescription because they didn't have to worry about the high cost of drugs or the exorbitant cost for a surgery. It just didn't exist. Now, that went into effect in Britain right after World War II. and it was one of the first things that they did, that the Parliament did after World War II. And because we were living there, we had to. The embassy required us to go private rather than to sort of, take advantage of their system. And you'd be surprised how difficult it was for us to pay. They would say, "Oh, no. We'll." The first night we were in England, we were staying at the hotel, and my wife became ill. They called for a doctor. The doctor came in the middle of the night and treated her, gave her a prescription. She was well in a day or so. And when I offered to pay him, right? "Oh, no, don't worry about that."
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah. So ever since
that
then,
I've been. I can give you the exact opposite of a case where we went on a family vacation to Atlantic City, and I got the flu, and my parents called the doctor, and the doctor came in, and he stuttered. We're going to have to give him a shot.
Oh, my.
Penicillin. And at the end of the thing, my father says, "How much?" He goes, $10. No stuttering. That was a family joke for a long time, but just the opposite of treatment that you get in the United States.
Well, you were in the United States. You were in Atlantic City, right?
Yeah, I was.
But
it's
New
you
Jersey,
were in England.
Yeah. But,
and you were in England.
Right.
So the differences in the billing process, let's put it that way. That's what I was calling attention to.
Yeah, I mean, and after our boys were born there, in each case, a visiting nurse would come to the house. I forget how many times during the first month or so, and give us orange juice and coupons for things and check the baby over, make sure they were all right. And of course, there was no charge for that either. But those are the kind of things you couldn't pay for. They had no way of taking money for these things.
Wow. Now, who compensated the doctor? The state or?
Yeah, the doctors are salaried.
Employed by the country or
the National Health System, the NHS, the National Health System. They're government employees. Now, and many of them, there are a number that have emigrated here because they would prefer to make a lot more money, and that's fine. But the doctors we saw over there were really good and concerned and interested. I'll tell you, the one snag is that if you want to see a specialist over there, you have to get a recommendation, a reference from your GP. You can't just make an appointment to see like a orthopedist or someone like that. That's the only.
Well, that's how it is on most group insurances right here,
exactly.
Right now.
It's same with mine. You need a referral.
Oh yeah.
You need one, but it lowers the cost.
Oh, okay.
Out here,
and if they're in network, it's so to speak.
Yeah, I've heard that term. Right. Mm-hmm.
Or an HM, the term you hear. The big one out here in California is Kaiser. And Kaiser is very well regulated in terms of who you can see, who you can't see. It all has to run through the GP. So, there you go. Michael, anything you could cheer us up a little bit? What's your impressions of the situation? Is everything going to be all right? Tell us that.
I'd love to say yes. I'm laughing, but even yesterday when I get together with, I'll tell you something that I thought was funny, It was raining the other day, as it has been here for on and off for a number of weeks. And I saw something that I said, no, I'm dreaming this. Here it is, it's raining. And I look out the window of my car, and there's a man with a hose washing his car.
In the rain.
I said, no, this is impossible. It's raining. And he's standing there with a hose washing his car. So I just, it is a pic. I would have loved to have, should have taken a picture. Because people will think I'm making that up. There is stuff.
It really would have been something if you had a convertible with the top down.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that. I went and told them. They said the same thing. That really would have been it. That would have, and I think I mentioned here.
That would have been too big for podcast radio. Then we would have. On Sullivan with that story.
Exactly. I'm trying to think of other funny stuff that goes on, but can't think of one.
I can tell you.
It doesn't have to be funny. We got David to think of one.
Well, this isn't funny, but this is really quite spectacular, I thought. I went to, most people have heard of the Air and Space Museum in Washington, and it's got all these planes and a couple of rockets and stuff. Well, there's an annex to the Air and Space Museum. It's out in Centerville, Virginia, in the middle of this big sprawling field, and it is just enormous. It has so many more planes and rockets, and they're all down there. I mean, there's even what they call the Blackbird, the SX-71, that supersonic plane. That, according to the plaque in front of it, its last flight, it flew from L.A. to Washington in 1 hour and change. Ooh, yes. Ooh. Amazing. So it's this enormous facility for all sorts of aircraft and helicopters, and they're hanging from the ceiling. You know, it looks like what my bedroom used to look like as a kid when I model planes and hang them up. You know, but it's enormous. It's absolutely enormous. So I was out there to see the new IMAX film, Apollo 11. And this is just a spectacular film. We've all seen shots of the moon landing, and Armstrong taking steps on the moon, and Aldrin taking equipment out. But it's all in black. That's all in black and white stuff. But they filmed during before, during, and after the actual flight. They had cameras all over the place, filming every detail of this flight, and it was all in color. And they recently discovered the producer. Well, not recently. It's got to be a couple of years to go through all of this. Something like 11,000 tapes of audio transmissions and 65 millimeter film that had been sort of lost. 65 millimeter, that's huge. And they made this 90-minute, documentary on the flight of Apollo 11. And you have never seen the surface of the moon like you see it in this film. I mean, you are practically standing on that moon surface. I mean, there are cameras everywhere. It was a remarkable film in beautiful color. Aldrin and Armstrong are standing. You can see the half blue Earth above the horizon there. I mean, it's just spectacular. If it comes to L.A., or up in the San Francisco area, do try to see it, because it is really worth seeing. And what's kind of interesting, you talk about something funny. They have these banks of the NASA engineers. You've seen this all on later rocket stuff. You know, they all sit there with this bank and they're all controlling one little aspect of the. Well, here are these rows and rows of men, primarily. I think there may have been one or two women. Rows and rows of these guys, all glued to this, you know, primitive computer monitor in front of them, and they're all identically dressed in those wash and wear shorts. Yeah, wash and wear short sleeve white shirts and thin, narrow ties.
Yeah, dark ties.
Dark ties. They looked like, Michael will remember this, they looked like when we went to assembly at 80.
Assembly, okay, right.
We had to wear white shirts and blue ties and dark pants. But these were, I mean, it was like a NASA uniform, you know. And then, of course, you know, the women, all the women and the men in their, what, those stretch pants. They used to, what was that stuff? They used to make stretch pants, and you know. So anyway, it was just a fantastic film, and I urge you to see it if you get a chance.
Okay.
That's my contribution for the week.
And it just coincides with the time you wanted to go. You have errands.
Yes, I do. So
you would track of that. And,
okay.
We'll be back next week.
Yes, absolutely.
This was fun.
Take care.
Given the topic of the day, it was fun. It was certainly informative. And I feel like my thinking is you know, along the correct lines.
Okay.
Still early, you point out,
yeah.
David. So,
all right.
Of
that I shall say, I do. Bye-bye.
Be well, everybody, and thank you for listening. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Michael Preminger, David Hubler, and me, the weak link of it all, Ralph Tyko. Adios, everybody. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.